Welcome back to American Jank. It's been a couple months. Life has been hectic for me and my guest as well. Today we have the author of Long Live Mortal Kombat Round 1. David L. Craddock is here, and I'm a huge fan of Mortal Kombat, and he sent me a copy of the book so I could read it, and I'm a huge fan of the book right now. So let's talk about this great tome of video game history and video game journalism. David, you will see you are now on screen with the magic of computers. Welcome.
Oh, the magic of computers, all the tubes connected. Thanks for having me.
No problem. I see a little Mortal Kombat 2 box of some sort behind you there.
Yeah, so one of the people I interviewed for Long Live Mortal Kombat was Danny Simon, who founded the licensing group, and he was in charge of the Mortal Kombat license for years. And he went through and sent me a bunch of Mortal Kombat stuff he had lying around. So this box is actually full of unopened trading cards. The
Wow.
Mortal Kombat 2 trading cards.
Trading cards.
Yeah,
That's something that's very 90s. I think I had some trading cards
yeah.
yeah. Like I remember having like Marvel Comics trading cards. Like it was the best decade for trading cards, I think, and for licensing stuff if you think about it.
Oh,
What a
definitely. It was all over
decade.
the place. Maybe
Bart
comparable
Simpson.
is today, though, since retro so in vogue, you can find almost the license for almost anything these days, you know?
Well, yes, but I think it was more prevalent in just like since it was for kids and it was kind
Yeah,
of like near the checkout counter in any type of store you would have some like Simpsons kind of merch or Mortal Kombat or Street Fighter or any type of
yeah.
cartoon. It was a glory days for plastic things with brands you like.
Definitely, for sure.
So, David, I was thinking about your book, which is for those who don't know, it's like an oral history. It's a great deep reporting on the first. I was gonna say decade of Mortal Kombat, but it's really the first 6 years. It just feels
Yeah,
longer.
yes. So the round one part of the subtitle indicates that it is the first part of a series, and each book of the trilogy will cover a certain area. And with this one, I chose to start with, of course, at the beginning, the arcade era.
Yes, and it's jam packed. That's why it feels like a decade in retrospect.
Yeah,
But it's like, yeah,
yeah,
it's the decade of the '90s. But the first game comes out in '92, and then the last game, the last arcade game is Mortal Kombat 4 comes out in '98, and then you have mythologies there and special forces, which you kind of touch upon at the very end of the book. But I wanted to ask you first of like how like it was so refreshing to read the book because I'm not only a fan of Mortal Kombat, but I'm a fan of good journalism and long form journalism, and I think there's less and less space for it. The economy around journalism is not very conducive to that type of work nowadays, and most of the people that are full time employed in that industry are really just having to churn out a lot of small articles every day, 5-10 articles a day,
yeah.
and the book really gave you the perfect outlet to do like really good work and in-depth interviews with a lot of people, great bibliography at the end, all your sources listed. It's like it's really just a great resource for people interested in it. How did you find yourself in that space? And I know this is not your only book. How did you kind of like? Did you decide to go that way, or did you realize, oh, things just worked out and this is my lane?
A little bit of column A and B, really, but it's first and foremost, it's always been purposeful. I love to write. I love writing more than anything. And I found years ago that I had an interest in and a knack for writing the stories of how games were made, and specifically the stories of the people who make them, because you have to learn the characters, quote unquote, in order to care about what they go on to make. So that's why, whether it's Long Live Mortal Kombat, Stay a While and Listen, Rocket Jump, Shovel Knight, I always introduce you to the people first and then get into the video game stuff, because the video games and technology to me are really just a stage on which these characters kind of play out. My first book, which became a bestseller, was Stay Wild and Listen Book One about Blizzard and Diablo. I didn't set out to write a bestseller, just as most game developers don't start out thinking that they're going to make a game of the year or one of the greatest games of all time. They just really want to make something, and it happens to catch on, and that's kind of what happened to me. And I had the advantage of having access to a lot of ex Blizzard staff to really round out the story. I've been writing for almost 20 years, and I write all sorts of stuff, books, novels, short stories, but also I write game narratives. I'm actually the lead narrative designer on a game that'll be announced sometime in 2023.
Awesome.
But I
Looking forward to
happen
it.
to, yeah, thank you. It'll be really exciting to share. And in this instance, I was hired at a company where I got to work with guys like Eric Sexton, Kelly Johnson, Michio Akamura, John Moran, who were all ex-Blizzard Northers. I knew them through my uncle who worked at Blizzard when I was a kid. You know, you grow up and you have that kid who's like, my uncle works at Nintendo, my uncle works at Blizzard. Mine really did. It was
All
actually
those
true.
kids kind of like made it
Yeah.
worse for you because like they were lying and they were stealing your valor.
Exactly. I would say my uncle, and you just get the eye roll. I'm like, no, seriously. But, I got to prove it because I would get
Right.
my friends into, I think we played every Blizzard Alpha from like Diablo through the WoW Friends and Family in like 2002 or 3, whenever that was, before it
Wow.
launched in 2004.
And
So it started
little
there.
connection there with Mortal Kombat
Yeah.
is that beyond NetherRealm, the only other studio to ever make a DC fighting game is Blizzard.
Yes,
Justice
that's
League
right.
Task
You know your
Force.
history.
Yes.
Yeah. And so that's the funny thing. Blizzard Entertainment made Justice League Task Force for the SNES. Condor, later named Blizzard North, made the Genesis version. They had never met, their heads had never met, and they went to a summer CES because this was before E3, like a year or two before E3, and found out, hey, we have the same publisher, we're making the same game. And, it was a Street Fighter 2 clone, so they weren't too dissimilar, but they were dissimilar enough that these guys realized they had a certain kismet. So,
yeah, I think people nowadays maybe
cool.
don't realize how back then you could have like the same game title and license and just completely different games on the Genesis and SNES just because it was two completely different studios not working from the same code base or anything.
Yeah, and sometimes they would be a little more closer than others. Like obviously, Arena made Mortal Kombat. You ported it to Genesis, and Sculpture Software did the SNES port. So they're still working for Mortal Kombat, but very different looks, feel, audioscapes, everything. So yeah, I kind of set out to write these books. Stay While and Listen was the snowball rolling down the proverbial hill. It just kept getting bigger, and really for the past coming up on 7 years, I've been at Shack News as the long reads editor. And Asif Khan, the CEO and Shack News luminary there, he pays me to write long reads, which are really just books that you can read online for free. Like you can go to shacknews.com right now and read Rocket Jump, Beneath a Starless Sky, which is my history of like the Infinity Engine games like Baldur's Gate, going into Pillars of Eternity. And so I haven't really been at Shack News much the last 2 years, but I really owe Asif especially a lot for helping me build momentum with more books such as Rocket Jump and Beneath the Starless Sky. And Mortal Kombat, I've been a fan since I was a kid. We'll probably talk more about that. But for me, writing the story Mortal Kombat was never a question of if, it was always a question of when.
Awesome. It was actually when I used to be a video game journalist. I was working at a publishing company here in Brazil, who did the Brazilian edition of Edge magazine, and they were thinking about
Edge magazine.
Yeah, and I was writing for them, and they wanted to start a book division, and I pitched them on like, oh, we should just like track down John Tobias and all those guys and talk about that, and they were like, yeah, we want to do something simpler, and they do kind of like compendium books and stuff like that nowadays. But I'm so glad that once I didn't have the chance to write that book, that book got made and that it got made so well. I really enjoyed it, and one of the things that I really liked about the book, coming back to just it being a work of good journalism, is that there's so much secondhand or third-hand information about stuff like Mortal Kombat, stuff that is purposely built to have these urban legends around it, that your book was finally, at least for me, answered certain questions and came up with details, like the whole ordeal between like the actors that wanted more pay, and why did these characters leave. Was that related to actors? Because as you mentioned in the book, like Carlos Pacina, who was Raiden in Mortal Kombat 1 and 2, he's still in the company like till this day, I believe. Like he does motion capture for them.
He just recently left
He just
on good terms, but he's been there from the beginning, from playing Raiden through MK11.
He's mocap in Deadly Alliance. So I was like, it wouldn't make sense that Raiden wasn't in MK3 because they had some sort of a legal dispute, as they had with his brother Daniel. And so how did you have a list of like Mortal Kombat mysteries you wanted to dig up, or was it just organically from talking to these people that you just ended up gathering all those details?
A lot of details do come organically. I always go into interviews with a list of questions, but my favorite tactic as an interviewer, and really it's just the tactic of being a good conversationalist. Anyone who's a good conversationalist knows this, is you don't try to steer the conversation. If the person you're talking to takes you in a certain direction, just go with it, because you never know what you're going to learn. You never know. That's a lot of times people apologize for rambling. I always tell them, don't worry about it. I get a lot of my best material that way. And I knew that I would be digging into, for example, the Daniel Pacina issue, Carlos's older brother who played Johnny Cage in the Ninjas in MK1 and 2, because he's very prolific. His side of the story has been out there, but the deeper I got, I noticed a lot of discrepancies. And so I did struggle a lot with whether or not I should include that material. I wasn't sure if I wanted to write that kind of book, because I never want to give people mud to throw, especially if it's mud that has been dry earth for decades. Like, why dredge that up and why open old wounds? But as a Mortal Kombat fan, first and foremost, I mean, I was 10 when the first game came to arcades, so I remember playing it. I've been there on the ride since the beginning. I really wanted the truth of this. I felt that fans deserved to know the truth. I think most people have, they know that I came with receipts. I would never say anything like what I say in Long Live Mortal Kombat without receipts. I have gotten some pushback, and I think it's just because there are a lot of people out there who maybe they're friends with Daniel, or maybe they just, they are in love with this video game character who doesn't really exist, and nostalgia clouds their vision. Whatever it is, they have pushed back a little on that. But for the most part, people have been like, wow, I never knew this. And, some people, I think, handle it very rationally. They said, look, it doesn't change how I feel about Daniel Pacina. He is Johnny Cage, which is a point I make in the book. I'm like, this guy's legacy was made. He just keeps embellishing it.
Right.
But they do appreciate having the truth out there. Most of Long Live Mortal Kombat is predicated on these fan stories. I did go in, to get back to your question. Some stuff came up organically. I did go in with a list of questions I wanted solved. Some related to the games and the characters, others related to the development, because that's one reason I write about games from the 80s and 90s. It's not necessarily because I'm nostalgic. I'm really not a nostalgic person, but because there were no accounts back then. It's not like today where you could buy a collector's edition and get a making of art book or DVD or digital movie, whatever it is today. So there are all these disparate interviews on all these magazines and all these websites, and I kind of wanted to just sort through them and get to the bottom of as much as I could.
Awesome. Yeah, I remember like back then, especially being a Mortal Kombat fan, every time a magazine would write a feature on it and you would get some new behind the scenes photo of the actors or some artwork, it was like, oh wow, look at these. Look at these. You got just another piece of the puzzle.
It was a special connection because it was the first game I saw as a kid that looked like, for all I know, they weren't digitized characters. They might have just been very small people doing these moves behind the facade of a screen. It looked real. And so when I saw, the actors, for example, I didn't know their names back then. Not a lot of people did, which is something else I get into. But when I saw Johnny Cage on a magazine, I knew that was Johnny Cage because he looked close enough to the game that I was like, oh, there he is. It was this really surreal sort of connection between a fictional character and a real person that I'd never encountered in video games before. Certainly not with games like Mario. That was clearly a cartoon character.
Yeah. Exactly. No, yeah. And I remember I think the first time I kind of like started paying attention to like the actors, like it's digitized people, but the fact that oh yeah, there's a person. It was like
Yeah,
I think my cousin, like I played the first MKs with my cousin who was 4 years older than me, and I remember he mentioned like that Ho Sung Pak, like he said, like the actor for Liu Kang in Mortal Kombat 2 is the same actor in Mortal Kombat 1. I was like, no, they look so different because like
yeah,
his hair is different and the resolution's so small that you add that little the
yeah.
red headband and stuff. I was like, is it the same guy?
Which was always one of my favorite things as a fan, going from sequel to sequel, seeing not only which characters would return and which would sit out, but the returning characters always looked different. And not necessarily because they were played by different actors, but you had a real sense of progression, of a
Yeah,
storyline continuing that Street Fighter 2 did not have. It was just update after update after update. I love Street Fighter
yeah.
2, but I became strongly attached to Mortal Kombat's lore because they were actually moving forward rather than just kind of building on top of the same game.
Yeah, lore is something very big about Mortal Kombat fans. I think every kind of fan that I've met for the Mortal Kombat series has some respect and interest in that lore. And back then, Street Fighter was the only thing as big as Mortal Kombat, and you had to go to like secondary sources like those terrible Malibu comics, or like the cartoons, which were different thing, be it Street
Yeah.
Fighter to Victory or the American cartoon. Those were different things. And Mortal Kombat, I think, especially John Tobias, he was eager to give us more lore and give us all those character bios and endings, and so
Yeah.
that was a great hook. And speaking of Tobias and Boone, and Access, since I don't believe any of them is an uncle of yours, how did you approach them? How did you, especially I think Boone, since he's still in there and entrenched in the Warner Brothers machine, was that something that you had to clear with their PR, and was it kind of an ordeal, or they were eager to talk?
This was it was a little bit of an ordeal, but in a very understandable and easy to navigate way. You just kind of had to focus. So John Tobias, I got lucky in a way. I guess just 3 years ago now, I had published a book called Arcade Perfect, which is about arcade to home versions, different games, but at the center of it, I really even then just wanted to write about Mortal Kombat. I wanted to write about the home versions because those versions I had a stronger connection to than the arcade games, since I could only play in the arcade when I could convince mom or dad to give me quarters. And once I had the game at home, I could play it whenever I wanted, as long as it was after 7:30 and after dinner and after my homework was done. So there were still provisos, but not as many. Um, and I had gotten in contact with John, and I think we connected, and I said, like, hey, I'm writing this book about conversions. Really want to write about Mortal Kombat 1 and 2 especially, and I just wondered if you could give me some background on the arcade versions, because in every chapter of Arcade Perfect, I talk about the original game so that you have a context for what made the ports so unique later in the chapter. And he was happy to do that, and he even read read the book and endorsed it. And then I came back to him last year and I said, hey, this probably doesn't surprise you, but one of my upcoming projects is a Mortal Kombat focused book. I'd like to talk to you again. And he actually told me he doesn't talk about Mortal Kombat as much these days. He's kind of moved on. He's doing other things. But since he knew me and knew that the book would happen because I'd proved that it would happen with previous works, he was interested in talking to me. But he had a condition. He didn't want me to quote him directly because he knew I wouldn't be able to talk directly to Ed Boon or anyone else at Warner Brothers. I let Warner Brothers know. I asked for permission to do interviews, but they went radio silent on that. So I said, that's fine, because I always have a grand plan. My grand plan was this. I wrote Long Live Mortal Kombat Round 1 by talking to over 60 people. John Tobias is one of them, and he spoke on behalf of himself and Ed. But like I said, I just didn't quote him directly out of respect.
Right.
But, I have the receipts for all that too. And obviously John read it and, verified that it was factually accurate. That's why he wrote the foreword to it. But I said, what I want this book to do is I want this book to come out, and I want it to show people the extent of my journalistic comprehensiveness, and hopefully that'll kind of lay groundwork to get access to Ed Boon, to Dan Forden, to John Vogel, to everyone else at NetherRealm for the second and third books. And After the book came out, about a week after, Ed Boon emailed me and he said, "Hey, I'd love to tweet about your book." And he did, and my Twitter has been melting down ever since. Sales, which are already doing well, just skyrocketed. And in fact, I'm really honored by this. But if you look at Ed Boon's Twitter profile as of this recording, that tweet is still his pinned tweet. So people go to that, you go to his Twitter page and see it right away. For as long as Twitter remains standing, anyway.
Yes.
Um,
For maybe pinned tweets are not going to be a feature anymore because somebody angers Elon Musk with
or
that somehow.
we'll pay for them. There'll be like gold pinned tweets and
Yeah.
red pinned tweets. Who knows what's going to happen?
You'll be banned
Yeah.
for linking to your book because it's not published
Yeah.
on Twitter. It's not a
Yeah,
series
exactly.
of threads.
I'll just have to start publishing it 240 characters at a time, I guess.
Exactly.
But yeah, so it's one of those deals where like I definitely didn't write it to appease John or Ed. It's not a sanitized version of the story. It's very real. You read the book, but I think that impressed them because they knew that I was willing to dig deep into things and look into things. And I know that people at NetherRealm have contacted me. They have the book. They've been reading it. They really enjoyed it, and they want to talk. So hopefully, we'll get to do that for the second and third books.
Awesome. And speaking of the second and third books, this was the 30th anniversary of Mortal Kombat this year that is coming to an end here. And I don't know how you feel about this, but I'm in the camp of fans who think that there's something is lacking in this celebration, and especially with the trailer that Warner put out a couple months ago, like to celebrate the 30th anniversary. It does seem like a trailer that was cut for something else that just never materialized. And like I would love to hear your comment on how you feel about that situation, but also, I would like to think that, with the pin tweet and Ed Boon, your book has kind of become the biggest celebratory product of those 30 years of Mortal Kombat. Do you think so?
I'm not biased at all, and I think you're absolutely 100% right. No, I think it has because, to be honest, even though there's some material in there that some people might find difficult to swallow, I think it is like 99% of it is a celebration. You can tell that I'm a fan. And a good writer as well, and that I wanted to tell you a story that you could get engrossed in, and that even no matter how thorough your Mortal Kombat knowledge, you'll come out of it having learned more than a thing or three. As far as the 30th celebration being lackluster, I think that's true, but I know there are a lot of people coming down hard on NetherRealm for that, and you have to remember that NetherRealm doesn't get to chart their own course. Ultimately, they are a Warner Brothers owned studio. And Warner Brothers probably, even if they don't have the last say of when Ed Boon or anyone else there can announce things, they probably have a pretty hefty vote. And I would feel like, obviously, not a lot of video game franchises. A lot of video game franchises turn 30, but they're not active. They've been, moribund for 10, 15, 20 plus years. Mortal Kombat is not that. It's the best-selling fighting game in the world. It's still very active. Mortal Kombat 12 is coming. I don't think that's much of a secret. And so I feel like if NetherRealm, they probably did want to announce something, but they have to hold back until the time is right. So I'm on board. My philosophy is whether it's a book, a movie, a new season of a TV show, a game, there's always something else out there to read, watch, play, do. Just give them time and it will come.
And speaking of being an active franchise all those years, I'm curious as to how you're putting together rounds 2 and 3, because the first 6 years of Mortal Kombat that you covered in round 1, they're packed full of stuff. And your writing does reflect that. It's a non-stop kind of like race towards the new thing, and we put the game out and put revisions out and add characters and add secrets in there. Now we're working on the second game, and then working on the third game and the update to the third game and the home versions and everything like that. And there's kind of a very I think apt stopping point there at the end of like, okay, they released Mortal Kombat 4. It was the last arcade release. It was not it was nowhere as successful and popular as the previous titles. I was actually very surprised to learn from your book that MK3 and Ultimate sold less arcade machines. There's less units than fewer units than MK2. I was very surprised at that. It was not my impression at all as just a kid going to the arcades. But you have this very iconic 6 years of Mortal Kombat, so iconic that when they come back for Mortal Kombat 9, what they do is, well, let's retell that story, and let's relive those characters in that moment of the franchise, and now you're tasked with going into some very, let's say, less glamorous part of Mortal Kombat. So what should we expect to be covered in round 2, for example? Is that just gonna be like, yeah, Special Forces was a bummer, and then there was that TV show, and Deadly Alliance, there was the Cooking with Scorpion video.
Yeah, it's definitely, the 3D era was a very weird time as a Mortal Kombat fan, because, and I don't mean this in a pejorative way, but I remember the first time I saw a screenshot for Deadly Alliance, and I was like, is that Mortal Kombat? Like, it looked so different.
Every character during that era looks so chunky.
Yeah, very, very chunky, probably because of the polygon count of the models, I would imagine. So round 2 will cover the 3D games. Final round, since Mortal Kombat is, of course, best 2 out of 3,
right,
will cover the modern era, the reboot era of NRS. I have contacts already set up to talk to you about rounds 2 and 3. I have not started them yet. I usually need just kind of a change of pace after a big book like Stay Wild and Listen, or like Long Live Mortal Kombat Now. So I'm putting out several other books soon. I'll be talking about that later in 2023. And I'm also working on a movie and a game, like I said. So I think you could look for round 2 probably sometime in 2024. But it's definitely going to be interesting to me as a fan, because I always have contingency plans. And I knew that even if I couldn't gain access to people at NetherRealm now, I could certainly talk to people who were there and have since left, because they're no longer under NDAs. And I do have a lot of those folks lined up to talk to. They're eager to talk. They've got stories. But I'm looking forward to digging into that, because it was just a weird time. I like the 3D era, but there were some weird decisions there that definitely made Mortal Kombat 9, the start of the reboot era, such a breath of fresh air. And for a lot of people, their favorite game in the franchise, mine included. I love Mortal Kombat 9.
I do love Mortal Kombat 9. I don't sure I love it more than Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3 still, but it's a really good game, and I've liked X and 11 as well, and yeah, it will be interesting to see how your access changes now that we're talking about an ongoing, especially with Final Round, an ongoing PR concern for Warner Bros. Those are active products, in that sense. But yeah, it'll be interesting. Certainly, there's a lot of veterans who have left and who can tell their side of that story. And beyond Mortal Kombat and Blizzard and all the stories that you've told, are there stories that you've tried to pursue in this fashion of like a book or a long read that just there's still not the access there? There's still no way to tell the story the way you think it should be told?
Yeah, there are some. I would have to sit down and think about it, honestly, because this will sound like a humble brag, but most of the time I usually get the access I want or need, and I can tell the stories. But there are some, like a lot of weird things happened at Respawn around the time I was going to write about Titanfall 1 and 2.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd still like to go back and revisit that. But I think that's before they switched gears to, what is their battle royale that's out now? Apex Legends? I don't know. But I don't really play those games. Yeah.
Apex Twin, whatever it's called, yes.
Yeah, whatever it is. Not Titanfall 3, which is what I really want. But
yeah.
That's the one that, that's the one that stands out to me. But for the most part, I've even set the stage for some of my next big books. I'll be working on those starting in January, starting interviews for those. And I usually I have a Rolodex now where I can usually get a hold of the people I need to talk to and make this stuff happen.
Awesome. That's great to hear. And it wouldn't be 2022 if I didn't ask you. And I know you're involved in projects in the audiovisual mediums.
Yes.
It's people don't like to read, David. Why is this not on Netflix?
Oh, I know.
Have there been talks? Are people interested in producing documentaries based on your books?
Um, yes, I've talked to at least one person, and I don't think that will move forward for reasons, but I'm certainly open to talks from others. So yeah, that actually has come up.
Awesome, awesome, good to hear. And audiobooks is are you doing audiobooks?
You know what? We are recording this on December 20th,
Yes.
2022, and just today, Tantor Media released Long Live Mortal Kombat Round 1 on an audiobook. In fact, I'll send you a code when we're done if you'd like to listen to
Awesome.
it.
I would love to. And did you read it? Because you have a good voice for audiobooks.
I did not read it.
Oh,
So I didn't, and I appreciate that. I didn't even volunteer because my schedule is ridiculous. I wouldn't have time to do it justice, but I was right on the front lines of helping pick the narrator, Andy Ingalls. He did a fantastic job. He's a
awesome.
great narrator, and I hope to keep working with him.
That's great. That's great. I asked because I did the audio for my audiobook because that way the publisher
Nice.
didn't have to pay anyone to read it, and so that was a great cost cutting measure. But also it was a very fun experience. So I do recommend it if for any of your future books that if your favorite narrator isn't available, I would tell you to give it a try. It's a fun experience.
I might have to try it. You know, the interesting thing is, there hasn't been as much activity I was like about adaptations to visual mediums.
Hmm.
Um, I've been approached by publishers several times to adapt my books to audio, and they're willing to pay advances, as Tantor Media was. So
Nice.
I'm always willing to take money if it means less for me to do because I already have a lot on my plate. So the advance was nice,
That
and they've
is,
set up, yeah,
yeah.
we've set up rounds 2 and final round. So I was like, yeah, let's do it. I'll just help you choose the narrator, and we're off
That
to the
that
races.
is great. People should yes that is great advice from David. Take the advances,
Yeah,
and especially in your case because that you're taking advances for the future installments, so you kind of have the financial security to like okay I'm going to have resources to work on these books. I can set aside time to work on these interviews and actually get this done because I think
exactly.
that uh so that leads me to understand is like I saw your website. I saw you have a lot of projects going at the same time as I think all of us freelance professionals need to have these days. But how have you been finding that to work out? Is it easy for you to kind of like pitch projects and kind of have them greenlit, or are you kind of just working on spec and kind of like, oh, I'm gonna do the research for this book and maybe before I'm finished, I'm gonna have something signed?
It's again, it's a little bit of both. I don't do a lot of freelance. I haven't for years. It is mostly books with me, and now this documentary on first person shooters and the game. I'm a hybrid author, so I've self-published. More like Long Live Mortal Kombat is self-published through Digital Monument Press, a company that my wife and I started. The labor distribution there is I write the books and she does everything else,
Awesome.
which she's fine with. But like I just got back from sending out like 50 books, and she packed those, and I took them to the post office. I signed them all too. That's not exactly hard work, but
Ooh, yeah.
I got that done. But I also sell other books to publishers. I'm sitting down with one publisher in January, and I have two others interested in sitting down with me. So I have found that I'm at a stage now where, like 4 times out of 5, when I pitch a book or a project, it does get greenlit. But there are other projects I want to do myself because I am a control freak. I don't shy away from self-publishing. I go through professional editors and everything, professional cover artists. So it has that professionally published sheen to it, as Long Live Mortal Kombat does. And it's kind of just I'm fortunate and privileged that I can pick and choose. I can say I'm going to self-publish this, but I wouldn't mind pitching this. And if it happens to be that the publisher doesn't go for it, I'll pitch it to another one, or I'll just do it myself because I know it will sell one way or another.
Cool. And it's great that the books are selling, and that people are interested, and that Ed Boon gave you the Ed Boon boost.
Yes. Yes.
And I would just how would you like? What are your would you give advice, and what would that advice be for people wanting to kind of do this sort of journalism, be it with games or other forms of entertainment or other industries, of how to, especially now in a world that is much more online, and we have very fewer opportunities to just like meet people in real life and kind of introduce ourselves. And I am very lucky that I got to do that part of my career when people actually went to a bunch of events all the time, and I got to like get my start meeting the PR people and the marketing people, and kind of just shaking hands. And now I think that even for me, like now doing this show alone, just without an at Rolling Stone email or anything I've had in the past, it's harder, especially because I'm trying to do a show with people from all over the world, and so you got to introduce yourself, and you got to make sure people pay attention to you. Not in this case. In this case, you actually offered to do an interview with me, which I'm so glad you did, because I was already following you, and I was so eager to read the book. But like, how would you think that starting out doing what you're doing today would be different, and how do you think people that might want to do this, and I hope there are people out there wanting to keep this going, how would you tell them to go about introducing themselves to people and trying to get that access, and differentiating themselves from like just a rando guy sending an email?
I would say that step one, before you even try to introduce yourself, is and this will never change. You need to read a lot, especially if you're going to try to write. There are a lot of members of the enthusiast press who are just not good writers, and their material is painful to read. And they usually don't stay in writing very long. They'll usually they'll cross over to like a PR set or something that involves writing, but it's not like a book or anything that people are going to read critically. It's press releases or whatever. And there's nothing wrong with that. But if you want to write good, if you want to write well, you need to do a lot of reading. And don't just read, don't just read me, don't just read Jason Schreier, David Kushner, etc. Read all over the place. I read constantly. I read everything. And that is important. You can't just it's just like getting a job as a video game journalist amounts to more than I play a lot of video games. So good for you. So does everyone else. My mother-in-law plays a lot of Candy Crush, which makes you different than her. And then step two is just start building a portfolio. When I started 20 years ago, I wrote for a now defunct site called mygamer.com. It was pro bono, but I was just building a portfolio, and I wasn't any good, but with every piece, with every place I went to afterwards, I got better. So the contacts will come, but you need to take the initiative and improve as a writer. And you do that by reading a lot and writing a lot. I would say read more than you play video games, because when you play video games, you're honestly not developing skills that are worthwhile. I think playing video games is fun, but unless you're going to try to be a streamer, which is another hard racket to break into, nobody cares that you can speedrun Dark Souls with a Guitar Hero guitar. Who gives a shit? Just keep writing and keep reading. Develop a skill, like a real viable skill. Yeah.
I think, I agree completely, because I remember when I started writing about games, it was around 2006. So and I was writing for the local EGM edition, stuff like that, and I used to have like a huge chip on my shoulder about these other writers who were like, I love video games, and I was like, just give me a guy who likes writing, who likes journalism, who doesn't care if he's gonna write about video games or about local politics. It's like, do you want to do like like you said, like a lot of games writing is not good. And a lot of it is just regurgitating press releases, and a lot of those people will find themselves happier and more useful doing PR, doing community management, and doing all that kind of stuff for a video game company, and then leave the critical writing and the reporting to people who are really into that and to honing kind of that skill. And I think that it's great that you're doing that and you're out there putting in the work, and that people are giving you access, and that work is finding an audience. And do you have any idea who you're like? I know books aren't the most easy to track media. They haven't found a way to put ebooks full of trackers from Facebook to know everything about your readers.
Right.
But who do you believe is your audience? And I don't even mean like who's buying the book, but who are you writing for? Because there's a big section in the beginning of the book that is like kind of a big, a very good contextualization of what was this industry at the time, who were these companies that would eventually become the midway that pushes Mortal Kombat out the door. When you're putting that together, that structure, you're I would believe, thinking of a potential reader. Who's that reader in your head, and does it change from book to book?
I think the reader in my head has always been me. It sounds so trite and so cliche, but it's true. If you set out to write something that you want to read, other people will want to read it too. Don't really. It's so weird. I think this is probably more true in fiction, but a lot of agents will say, "Don't chase the market." Well, it's easy for you to say because as an agent, you are looking for what's trending in the market. Don't deny it. You might, for every 4 books you sign, those 4 books are trending books, and then you're going to take a chance. The 5th book is going to be your baby. Maybe it'll take off, maybe it won't. Yeah. But the reader is me because I've always wanted to read these books. When I think the first book about video games I read, I almost said wrote because it's getting me the habit, but it's back here somewhere. It was either Masters of Doom by David Kushner or The Ultimate History of Video Games by Stephen Kent. And it was The Ultimate History of Video Games because that came out 2 years before Masters of Doom. But I was just absorbed. It was, here's someone writing for this thing about this thing that I love. And I will take a book over a YouTube video or a Netflix series or a movie any day, because the thing is, when you create for those mediums, you're creating for people who tend to have short attention spans, like me, to be honest. It's kind of ironic, but you can't go into the same level of depth that I can in a 200,000 word book. And that's I'm writing for myself. I want that level of depth, and I know other people do too, and I found an audience. Now, I'm working on a documentary about first-person shooters, and it's going to be around 3.5 hours. And wow. Even then, we're having to leave so much on the cutting room floor. So I'm proud of it, and we're going to make something that you'll love to watch. You're going to learn things you've never known about, Doom, Quake, Unreal, Duke Nukem, Halo, you name it. You're going to learn that stuff. But everything we're leaving on the cutting room floor, I could find a way to work into a book without bloating the book, without making it feel long-winded or dry. Yeah. And that to me is the magic of books. If you write for yourself, if you write what you want to read, you will find an audience because there are other people out there like you.
Yes, and I don't know if you think about your works this way, but the way, I have worked now on projects that start out as books, and then we adapt them into other mediums, be it TV or podcast. And I have done the reverse of like, let's take this and expand it into a book. But that's kind of always the view I have, is like the book can contain all. It's the deepest. It's like the person that wants to know the most about something will read the book, and then we can make this into a podcast, which is still in depth and has a longer attention grabbing power. And then the audio visual, the video, the documentary has to be as visually dynamic and exciting as all the content beneath it. So it needs to be very, very polished. So
it's such a difficult balance to strike, right? Because the visual version of anything is more accessible because more people are willing to sit down and watch a show or a movie. But you also have to have depth there. And that's a balance I'm learning how to strike in this documentary. But I 100% agree. I'm hoping that I've been told yes and no. It kind of goes back and forth, but I've been told I'll be able to take the FPS documentary and write the unabridged version.
Awesome.
That's something I would love to do, because you're exactly right. Like, if you only watch the movie, you won't be missing anything you didn't know about. You're going to go in there, you're going to have a good time, you're going to learn stuff. But if you read the book, it's just going that much deeper to where fans would want to have both on their shelves,
Totally. Yeah, and as you know, as a creative person that has to pitch projects as commercial endeavors, that is something that I find very attractive. Is like, yeah, this is a documentary, but this is also a book tied into the documentary. So people that really like this documentary can go deep and buy the book and be really into it. And more than that, I think that books are and the written media is, of course, the go-to way to immortalize research and knowledge for a reason, right? It is the most direct translation of our thoughts. We think in words and we put those words down, and that there they are, fixed
Yes.
in a way that is very easy to absorb by another mind. And because of that, I think that putting it down in a book like you did with Long Live Mortal Kombat, and as you wish to do with the FPS documentary, really helps it become a source for other works and for other research, right?
Mhm. Yeah, no, I completely agree. I mean, I love books and I love books in all their forms. You know, when I'm out, when I'm exercising, running errands, I'm listening to an audiobook. When I'm home, I'm reading a print book or a Kindle book. And so that's another means, like, you know, one reason I really wanted an audio version of Long Live MK out is I know that there are people who may not be inclined to sit down and read a book, but they have commutes or they go out and exercise and they want to listen to stories. And so, boom, that's another way to reach people. I've had fans reach me specifically to ask for audiobooks of Long Live MK, Stay a While and Listen, both of volumes of which have audiobook versions out. So yeah, that's definitely something I plan to do even more of in the future.
Awesome. One last thing before we do the special bonus stage of us trying to talk about Mortal Kombat while playing Mortal Kombat, which will certainly be fun to watch, is
Yes.
that you told me that Tobias was kind of like, hey, I don't talk much about Mortal Kombat anymore, which is true. He was very radio silent for a while, but I feel that, and I don't know exactly when you sat down to interview him for the book, but he has become, and especially I think because of his son. His son is very active on social media now, posting a lot of old like Mortal Kombat historical artifacts that his dad has, and pictures with him and Ed Boon and stuff like that, and celebrating the history of Mortal Kombat. Tobias seems to be much more active now in talking about Mortal Kombat online and kind of posting old art that he drew for the games, answering fan questions. Do you feel that was that something that he was already doing and he tapped into, or was that something that you saw happen after you kind of stoked the flames of nostalgia in him?
Oh, this was something he was already doing, and he doesn't, you know, he's not posting daily, but it seems like a few times a month he will share stories. Especially, I think he was especially active in 2020 when a lot of people were inside at home, right? And
Yeah.
last year and also this year leading up to the 30th anniversary. So yeah, this is I can't take credit for that. But that I was fortunate. The timing was fortuitous because a lot of this stuff was on the tip of his tongue.
Right.
So right.
And one last thing, I've done the pilgrimage of NAMK fan. I was in Chicago once, then I went to the Galloping Ghost arcade, and it was such. I wanted to ask you, like, if you'd done, I know that most of the book was done in the post COVID world, but if you've done any like research traveling for your book to meet people or to go to these places, because especially reading your book after having gone in 2018, of like just looking at how for this story in particular it's such a precious place where you can kind of step through a portal in time where there's all the 90s midway games, there's the killer there's the Primal Rage 2 machine that was never released, there's the Grid machine, there's all the Mortal Kombats, and there's like signed pictures of Richard DeVizio and Daniel Pacina that you can buy, and MK memorabilia that would not have look out of place in 1995 if you were there. Um, was that something that you were able to do or not? And do you feel that it is important for research projects like this to get out of your house and not do everything through webcams and Zoom?
I think that it is important, but every writer will ultimately or should ultimately do what they can do. I can't remember her name, but there's one of my favorite writers. She wrote Seabiscuit and Unbroken, and she has chronic fatigue syndrome.
Mhm.
So, for example, in Unbroken, she wrote about this. She wrote about Louis Zampini, who was an Olympic runner who was drafted in World War II and then became a POW and underwent horrific torture and treatment. And he flew planes. She actually had the planes that he flew. I don't know if they were his planes, but the same model of plane delivered to her house and taken apart so that she could inspect every part.
Wow.
So that was her doing thorough research to the extent that she could. So I definitely think that, not everything should be done from home. But if you have some sort of disability or circumstance that requires that, just go as far as you can for the sake of your research.
And in that case, seems like she made the world come to her. She found a good way.
She still got it done. She found a way.
Yeah.
And for me, I did go to Chicago. I visited Galloping Ghost. I met Doc Mack. I actually interviewed him for the book. Next year in 2023, I'm releasing a new edition of Long Live Mortal Kombat called Ultimate Long Live Mortal Kombat.
You learned from the masters.
I learned from the masters, man. It'll be kind of an oversized coffee table style book with a ton of photographs, concept art, same story. So you're not missing anything if you buy the book now. But this collector's edition, it'll be around $200, but you'll get your money's worth. It'll be jam packed with all sorts of photographs and artwork and stuff.
That's great.
And while my wife and I, we were in Chicago for our anniversary. So we saw, what was it? AEW All Out on Sunday night. I think that was the 4th.
What a weekend.
What a weekend. What a weekend. And then we got back to our hotel room, and I was just on my phone refreshing Squared Circle Reddit, reading about Brawl Out, the fallout afterwards and all that stuff. But the next day, September 5th, was our anniversary. And then Tuesday, the 6th, we went to Galloping Ghost, and she took pictures of every arcade machine I mentioned in the book. And she's an amazing graphic designer. She's going to be making some amazing layout designs with those photos and more, many of which have been given. Some from John Tobias. He opened his archives to me as well. So Ultimate Long Live MK Round 1 will be out next year.
You got a customer right here. A coffee table book with
awesome.
Historical artifacts of Mortal Kombat is something I would gladly display in my living room.
Glad to hear it.
Which does contain some more or less embarrassing video game artifacts from my time in that industry. So, well, the last thing then, since you gave me the wrestling hook there, I'll leave this as my suggestion for a future David L. Craddock book, and this will be the end of our regular episode. I don't know if you remember this show, but it's I think the maximum crossover between Mortal Kombat and wrestling is the TV show WAMC Masters.
I knew you were going to mention that. So let me tell you, before you go any further, right now, among the other things I do, I curate books about gaming for storybundle.com. Right now, for the next 9 days, I think, as of this recording, you can get the video game chill book bundle. And I met a guy, Christopher Landis, I believe, who wrote the oral history of WMAC Masters.
I didn't know that existed.
You can get that right now. It's in hardcover or softcover as well. But we also he created EPUB, Mobi, and PDF versions that you can get with 9 other books, 2 of which are mine, for like $20 right now.
That's awesome. I will get it, and I recommend that everyone watching and listening to this get it as well. I've gotten other story bundles, and it's a great resource to have. Just download it all to your Kindle, and then when you're bored, you go like, "Ooh, what do I got here?"
Yep, exactly.
Thank you so much, David. People can reach you on Twitter for as long as that is just on fire and not completely burned. And Long Live Mortal Kombat. People can get that anywhere they get fine ebooks, and is it out on paperback and hardcover?
Paperback and hardcover as well. At David L. Craddock. I think it's my pinned tweet. All the links you need for where to buy it.
Or Ed
Boone's
should be pinned tweet.
Or Ed Boone's pinned tweet too. Yeah, which is awesome.
Give that guy that affiliate money. He needs it. He will certainly appreciate it and put it to good work in the Mortal Kombat universe. Audiobook coming soon. Ultimate version for those of us who want a nice coffee table version coming soon. And of course, rounds 2 and final round. Thank you so much, David. This is the end of the regular episode, and now it ends for people. It ended for people.